books. We're gonna use it on your iPad.
I'm gonna read both places at the same time.
Yeah.
I'm trying to click on my iPad.
So what's the web address? How do I get on YouTube?
You have to go on Google Plus.
I need to go to my email.
Let's grab something to eat.
You're here today.
Yeah, I'm here today. We've got to sign up.
That's your plan.
I haven't seen you for ages. Huh?
Listen, Graham, you've been avoiding me.
I've been avoiding you.
Graham's been avoiding everybody, so we don't really take it.
I won't take it for you.
That's the benefit of being on both campuses. You can say,
Crying many times that you make it. I'm very happy. Oh no, it's all stupid. Yeah.
you've been one way.
True.
We can go this one.
Yeah. I was in Cambridge.
Where? Did you work with Jeff?
No, my thing's for national, so
Luke was supposed to join us from Nathan. Yeah, I'm still waiting for his.
That's what Gmail.
I did mention it. I did mention it.
Social thing.
You must keep hanging out. You need to enable the access because you don't allow. You must set it up.
It's called the cars
Setting. Let's try it.
What I did in Newcastle, but it's similar radio.
You gotta go to settings, setting, privacy, enable.
Oh,
As you setting.
whether that policy settings. So I had to check it. You say
Privacy.
it's actually there may be problems with the non-disclosure agreement.
And then you go back to the hangout.
But we
No, that one. The hangout. One.
students are academic staff, there is a sensitive.
And it should be.
And so I think another sensitive matter is like the yeah, I'd be happy, I'm happy to show them and look at the non-disclosure agreement.
I see myself.
Like that. That was
So one viewer.
a legal department,
Click on that.
and they own the intellectual property to it. Except at that one, we said everything. Yeah, well, we have to get permission from the legal
Another one.
department.
We actually have
Give them
one
a copy
viewer.
that they could then, otherwise,
The
you could give them a copy, I suppose. It would have to be on the condition that the intellectual.
Two viewers now.
Because he asked you.
But this is gonna be one way.
The
The two viewers from external viewer.
That's myself.
I probably Jeff.
Only from the fact that. Would you like to be to send email or you can use it? And I'll send him a copy of the stuff.
Because there's two.
But the non-disclosure agreement was written by lawyers, and I know they've talked about the intellectual property. They can't take people to organise.
The university.
That's right. They would have to drop their own, but to give them an example, this is one of the two guys. The survey, they can't use our survey, you know, the derivation.
No, just.
And do it everything.
I can see it.
That's great. Just try this.
You probably need to shut that.
What's the course
And then
Oh, yeah.
You finished the museum art
Everybody.
paper or structure analysis. Did you have a multiple choice?
Half of one question.
Save it to like.
No, yours is
We're talking about having a.
very good.
Ah, okay.
You probably will not find some cause.
Do you need to accept somebody?
It doesn't matter if there's an engineer.
What? Someone is
No,
requesting to join.
No, who's like an employee?
You have an engineering position, you understand.
I can't accept it.
I can't remember now. Like the friend engineering and one thinking around. Or David.
Well, we'll start.
David.
Yeah, I think we should start.
Like engineering.
Well, I can't microphone. Okay, good day, everybody. Thanks for coming to this Learning and Teaching Seminar. This is actually our final seminar for this semester. So today we have two exciting things. First of all, it's a topic presented by Krieng. He's going to talk about flipped classes. And the second one, we're trying to set up this Hangout stuff that looks like, I'm not sure it's probably working. We're going to check the data. Well, I cannot actually see it on my app, but it looks like that two people are watching this live broadcast.
One step.
One step. Oh, yeah, I do that. Oh, I can't do that. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Slightly delayed, but it's coming.
Do you want to show people, Krieng?
Oh, that's like everything.
Oh, it's working.
So this is on essentially Google Plus. I've been invited, so it'll play by YouTube, doesn't it, somehow?
By YouTube. But we can do a live kind of conversation as well. But you need to give me your Gmail account.
Guess what I'm doing? I just saw you can get food.
Yeah. Delay. Yeah, that's unless you give me your, and then I'll invite you directly.
I did. I emailed you yesterday.
It
doesn't matter.
Okay, anyway, guys.
Anyway, let's do it.
Also, write your name here.
I can't put
Okay, so.
All right. Thanks everyone for coming
you.
to this seminar. As you can see, we are trying out this Google Hangout thing, and then if it works well for today, we'll probably try it again in the next event. And this one, sorry. Oh, thanks. And this one is actually public, so anyone in the world can click on this event and then watch.
If they knew it was taking place.
Yeah, if they know it. Yeah, if they know it's on. It will be populated in the main Google Hangout page, so anyone can be a random person can click and then have a go with it.
Is this the first time it's been used?
Here?
Well, first time here.
With us, yes. We're looking at Skype, but Skype you only have one-on-one, I think.
We don't. We just bought Skype Premium so we can have.
Oh, you can have more. So that's another way what you can do. But for this one, it actually will be recorded automatically on YouTube, so we can send the link to anyone who wants to see.
I'm glad we've got the best looking presenters.
Thanks, Charles. I think better get to the topic. So the topic today is about the classroom, as Ivan introduced. Thanks, Ivan. For this, what about this? Can you see me? No. Yes, cameraman. Thank you. I'll stay here.
Yeah.
For this presentation, I've used Flip Classroom for this semester for the first time for my project management course, Postgraduate, and then today I'm going to talk about my experience with this technique. But before we get to that, just look at some basics. I mean, I believe that most of you know about Flip, okay, the concept behind Flip. So it's actually quite simple, mainly if you compare that with traditional lecture. Traditional lecture, what you're going to see is that the student probably read the material before. In most cases, probably they won't. And then they come to the class. So ideally with traditional, they peruse the material, and then they come to the class, they listen to you talking about, going through your PowerPoint, and then after that, hopefully they'll go back and sort of do some kind of review and then work on homework and assignment. But with Flip, again, the same process before coming to the class. The student will have to watch your material, but in Flip, ideally your material have to be recorded. It will be lecture capture of your presentation of the material, and with that you probably need to add some other learning resources to help the student sort of learn a bit better. Could be some external link to website or video or things like that. It's more interactive in terms of the learning resources for the student. And after that, when the student comes to the class, so we assume that the student have studied all the necessary material or the concepts. When they come to the class, we use the class time to do activities, to achieve, to get the student to exercise their higher order thinking skills. So mainly with Flip Classroom, we're looking at three main concepts here. Active learning, so they just don't come to the class and then sit back and listen to you talking about your PowerPoint. So they need to engage. They need to be active in participating in the activity. So active learning, engagement, and higher order thinking skills, because they have to analyze. They have to actually talk to their friend, and then just to complete the activity during the class. And after that, again, the student expected to go back and then use their knowledge to perform assignments. So the only main difference, I think, would be the pre-learning stage, where you need to provide material, interactive material for students, mainly recording. And during the class, it's more about activities, group work, and group maybe some case study or some different teaching approaches that you want to use, and I will talk about that later. So that's the basic of Flip versus traditional classroom. Now, I came across this survey by an institution called NMC, New Media or something, I can't remember, but they actually conducted a survey on the technology that would have high impact in the next 5 years. So they have next 5 years or next 10 years, but with the next 5 years, flipped classroom is #1. So it's been surveyed that this is going to be a hit in the next 5 years. I mean, it's going to be something that the teachers or the educator will tend to use, given all the access to technology, internet, with all the, the ability to stream all the live content. So we would have all the material ready before the class, and students just come and then do the activity. So that's from the survey. There's some other things like 3D printing, Jeff, you'll probably be happy to see that. 3D printing #3, and there's #4, gamification. Gamification is another interesting topic where you use, not really competition, but still, yeah, it's like playing games, but you don't really, it's not just use games, you use competition and collaboration to compete, and then students get the score, get the badge, not necessarily linked to their actual grade, but get the student to participate and then compete, so they can be #1 and #2, like it's like playing games. So that's #4, but I'll skip that. But in short, that flipped classroom is #1 there. So it's becoming very popular, okay, nowadays with this kind of technique. With flipped classroom, well, it's not just about giving them the lecture recording and then come to the class. It's more about looking at whether you need it or not using the flip, because the concept is very simple. This one I took this diagram from UQ, where I went for training late last year for training before A square. So they actually talk about some design considerations in your flipped classroom environment. Mainly, to use it or not, you got to look at your context of your course. Some course, I don't know whether it's possible to do flip, because it's probably content intensive, and you can't rely on the student to actually read through and then material and understand by themselves. So in some contexts, it's probably a bit more difficult. It's not impossible, but it's probably more difficult. You need a bit more work. And you need some other drivers. Your university, I mean, do we support flip? Do we provide resources? Do we have enough technology? But with Griffith, I'm pretty sure that in terms of the technology, in terms of putting things online, like for my course, is part of the Master of Environmental Engineering online pilot program. So the technology is there. I think that one we can tick off. Well, with the students, for my course, they're postgrad, so hopefully they have that level of maturity to actually be a bit more independent. Okay, so these are a number of drivers that you need to consider, but I'll talk about that later on in my actual case study. And when designing your class, you got to look at your content, you got to look at the activities that you're going to use, you got to look at how you assess, and you have to look at how you evaluate your flipped classroom activity. And all of these things, you got to make sure that they kind of align well with all your learning outcome, the ownership of learning, sharing understanding of the content. Okay, this is pretty much the overall consideration that you need to look at. But very important one would be the resource. You need, if it's a big class, you need facilitators, you need tutors who actually walk around and trying to make sure that the students are on the right track. If you have a big class, you need more resources. In designing the flipped classroom, there are 4 main elements that I actually follow. One is you have to tick all the boxes. You need to look at the independent learning element there. the material that you give to the student, whether they're up to scratch, whether you have recording, whether you have all the links and all the videos just to help the student learn the best. So that's the first one. The second one is the engaged learning in class. You have to think about activities. What sort of activities you can use to achieve the learning objective within that particular module or particular week. So you have to try to come up with some interesting activities to make the class a bit more engaging, more fun. Number 3, important, you got to make sure that in the end you kind of tie them up, all these different activities, different outcomes. So you can't have a loose end when you finish your class. You got to wrap it up, link everything together, and then you link back to your learning objective. So that's integration. And the last one, you have to reflect, you have to evaluate your performance in your flipped classroom by talking to the student, by your own feeling. So usually at the end of the class, I'll just trying to see what sort of feeling do I actually have, and the reaction from the students. So my personal motivation in using Flip, well, mainly I got a number of comments from students from my SEC saying that your class is boring. It's just regurgitating of the material. We can read by ourselves. So that's the comment that I start to see coming into my SEC, given all the lecture material that I give them, in advance. So they say, oh, we got everything. Why do we just repeating the same thing on the same material that already up on Learning Griffiths? Okay, all right, I'll take note on that. And my SEC score on the engagement is not that high. It's okay, it's average, but it's not as I expected. Probably because of the nature of the course as well. So mainly I look at the technique, okay, what can I do? So I came across this late last year, I think, when I looked at my online learning readiness project, and then I came across this technique, I looked into it, and I think, okay, maybe it's possible, I'll use this semester. And for this course, if I want to talk about specifically about my course, Project Management, Postgraduate, 7201 ENG. In total, I have 120 students. Online, I have 52. On campus, I have 68. So pretty much reasonably equally distributed. Attendance not compulsory. Anyone can come, or if you're not ready, too lazy, you can stay home. So that's not compulsory here. So that means I can have students who enroll in online course coming to the class, and at the same time, the on-campus, they can actually stay home and watch the lecture capture or learn by themselves as well. Some students, mostly they're international, they have restriction on online enrollment, and some students, they just at Nation campus, they don't want to travel down here, so they go as online, so it's quite flexible. And the most important part would be the online materials. It's already fully available as part of Master of Environmental Engineering Online pilot program. So we got the education designer to help putting all the material out there. It's all web-based, with all the hyperlink to different resources. So I think it's actually quite good with the online material. And I hope that the student can go in there and then study by themselves. That's my assumption. And with the content, as I said, things online, and then I hope the student would be able to learn by themselves before coming to the class. The student, they are postgraduate. My assumption was that they are a bit more independent in terms of learning, and they have that higher level of maturity to conduct independent studying. The class size, I have about, like you've seen before, in class 1 is about 68, but on average, there's about 40 students turn up in the class on average. So reasonable class size. Just myself alone can actually do the facilitation. I can break group into, say, 7-8 group, and then I can manage the activity by myself. So I don't actually need extra tutor to help me do that. Now, with the design that I used, if you remember, there are 4 elements there. So I thought through all this 4, and then make sure that it sort of line up with the learning objective. Independent learning, I tick that box. I got the online material there. Learning engagement, this is a bit more challenging because I have to come up with the activities every week. Not every week, or some week you can't really use it. So most of the weeks that I I've been teaching so far, I had to sit down and think about doing research on activities or case study that I can use during the class. And integration, I think this is not that difficult, given that you know what you're talking about, so you can sort of tie them up. But you need to tell a good story in the end, trying to link everything, link all the outcome, and then give them a sort of a summary so they understand the whole picture for that particular week. And then reflection, talk to the student, reflect on your own practice, just to see whether it's you have done a good job for that particular week. So this is pretty much the design element for my flip, which I follow the UQ model. This is a table that I use for so far. So I've done what 6 flip classes. So not, like I said, not all of them I can flip. So I've done 2, 3 week 2 to 5, and then I skip in the middle, and then I brought it back week 9 and 10. I'm just going to give you a quick going through of this activity that I use. So different topics, you probably can skip that. But for each week, I will highlight on the key concept that I want the student to get the message. I want to get my message across to the student. So I'll highlight on those concepts. And for each week, I use mainly alternate the problem-based learning and case-based learning. So they're my main pedagogical approaches that I use. With problem-based learning, the student are given problem, they have to solve it as a group, sometimes pair, sometimes individual. With case-based learning, they're given a case study, and then they have to analyze and come up with some lesson learned that they can link back to the learning objective. Let me give you an example. Like this one, case-based learning, I use the case study of the Heathrow T5 opening chaos. So I link it back to the concept of stakeholder management. Project did well throughout the life cycle, but in the end, on the opening day, it just it went ugly because what? Because you can link it back to the stakeholder management. It wasn't there. Last week, I did brainstorming activity using something like Google Form. I'll talk about it later. Using some technology to support the activity, so make the class a bit more interesting compared to the traditional one. So this is a summary of my activities that I use, and the resources. Mainly, they are case study document. They are online resources, something that I can actually use without paying too much money. So most of them, they're quite free. They're all free, actually. YouTube, Google Form, Google Doc, online game, they are free. So they're my resources. Now let's look at some example of activities. I'll try to wrap it up quickly so we have more time for discussion. This is week 5. So every week I would prepare my teaching plan. So I'm trying to make sure that I manage everything to be done in, say, no more than 2.5 hours. The class is booked for 3, but I usually do about 2.5 hours. So it mainly consists of the recap of what the class has done in the previous week, just to make sure that they have that integration element. So last week we did this. This week we're going to do this, and how do the materials in these weeks link? They're linked to the last week. So just make sure that they have a bridge there. And then I'll recap the key concept, because the thing is that you can't really rely on the student to read everything. You can't have that kind of assumption. At least you give them some review. These are the key concepts in the lecture. In the lecture note, you sort of extract some key concepts, and then you talk about those things. You highlight those things. Or mainly, they are the concepts that the student need to understand before doing the activity. And you come to the activity itself. The activity takes around 40 minutes, around that, including the time for a student to discuss. So about 40 minutes. And so that's my teaching plan. I think each week is going to be quite similar. So this is starting with talking, chit-chat, and then talking about last week, recap about this week, and then do the activity. So they're pretty much the same. In week 5, I got them to look at, to design a lunchbox. So this is part of the activity. I taught them the concept of quality function deployment. This is for product design, industrial design. So I got them to use this concept and try to sort of capture customer requirement and link it back to product specification. This is part of client customer requirement or stakeholder management module. So I got them to design a lunchbox for different target customers, for school children, construction workers, office workers, the different target group. And then I gave them this the exercise sheet as a group. They have to identify the requirement. They have to identify the technical requirement that will come together as a big lunchbox. And then they have to do all the techniques that they learned from the lecture material, come up with the design. And I got them to draw this the design of their lunchbox. It's not that good, given the engineers, but it's just for fun. In the end, they will compare it. So I got them to present in front of the class, talk about their design, talk about their requirement, and then sort of compare. It's a bit of fun, and then laughing. We have some funny drawing up there, so people, students actually laugh about it, and then we kind of make fun out of each other. And in week 9 I use online game. So in week 9 I taught them about project planning and project scheduling in terms of time and resource. The main concept was that I wanted them to look at the relationship between resource and task. Okay, so I use this game. So this game is online, it's free. You can assign resource, and different resource will have different characteristics with different performance. One is slow, one is fast, one is expensive. So the student got to assign the resource to the task given there. So they learned the concept about critical tasks, so they know which tasks are important. So in important tasks, you need to probably get someone who a bit more efficient working on those tasks, and they have to learn how to stagger the resource, because one person working straight will be burnt out. So that burnout factor will be reflected on that as well. So I use that to teach the project scheduling, and had a good fun. Some students got it right at first go, but some took a couple attempts. And then there's a leaderboard in the bottom. That's just part of that website. So another good fun for students to actually play and then test their understanding about this concept. And last week, this is the recent activity I used. Like I said, I used Google Form. In this week, it was about risk management. Very simple concept. Okay, risk management, I asked them to look at, I showed them case study of the Malaysian flood control project, big project, very interesting. So I showed them that case study, and then I asked them to actually identify the risk. Very simple activity. Identify risk. What are the internal risks? What are the external risks that you can identify? And then through Google Form, which is quite convenient, you just set up the form, you send the link to the student, you put it on Learning Graphic. The student click on it, they type the answer. They can do this as pair, as group, or as individual if they wanted to. The student answered the question. I got the response straight away on my Google document, on my Graphic thing. So I can see the result from the student and with the name as well, but I just hit the name there. So I use those results, and then I use something called the tag crowd. It's just frequency. Look at the words frequency and put them together. Visualize the text from the response, and then I came up with this figure from the tag crowd website, and then I can use it to highlight. Okay, this is the thing that you sort of have consensus on the risk for this project. It's about technical, tunnel construction, things like that. And then you can use that to kind of build on the discussion in the end to link things back to your concept. So that's my week 10 there. And this is during the class. For this class, like I said, most of them, they're international. At first, I was a bit unsure because some international students are probably a bit shy to talk. But I was kind of surprised and impressed in a way that there's a lot of students, they try to contribute, trying to talk, trying to put their hand up, and then came in front of the class, even though their English is not that not the best, but they try, and then they work together as a team, which is what the whole objective of the flipped class is about, getting students to be a bit more active on their learning as a team. And reflection. So after each class, like I said, I talk to students and just get the initial feedback. But I actually did focus group as well, just to obtain a bit more in-depth feedback on the student. And these are the students attending the focus group. So they're all international, not all. They're one local there, and then they're from different countries. And what I like about this group is that they are normally distributed. So should represent a really good sample of my focus group. Okay, so the benefits I got from the student perspective is that they have the opportunity to apply relevant knowledge within a controlled environment, because they're forced to do the activities. So they're forced to learn. So that's the interesting comment I got from one of the students who participated in the focus group. They admit that in many times, many weeks, they actually didn't read or watch the material, but they were forced to do so during the class. So they said that's why in that way they're forced to learn in that week, and by doing that they don't cram that study later in the course. So that's the feedback that I got. So that's the second one. So they kind of build their knowledge gradually over the semester. But I guess, of course, there'll be some students who cram the study because they never participated in the flipped class at all. There'll be, of course, classes are more interesting and engaging. This is the thing that the comments I got from the student, because it's not just about coming and listening to my lecture. It's about doing something interesting in there, something fun. Sometimes it's not that intense, but it's a bit more fun and getting the conversation, dialogue around with the students. So this is mainly from the student. From myself, less talking in front of the class. Compared to my maybe previous last year, no, a year before, I was on SP last year. A year before, mainly 3 hours. I used all the 3 hours. Walk in front of the class, talk and talk and talk and talk, 3 hours. I was exhausted at the end of the class. But for flip, I feel pretty good, because most of the time students we have to talk. So I was just standing and then do a bit of facilitation. What do you think? Oh, that's good. Let's put them together, all the knowledge. So less talking in front of the class, and you'll be less exhausted at the end compared with the traditional. And I had opportunity to use the various teaching approaches that I came across. The Google Form, the tag crown, the games, and things like that. Because you're a bit more now, it's becoming more flexible during the class time. You have 3 hours to do whatever you want to do with the with the activities. So I had a bit more opportunity to try to experiment with new technology. And teaching is a bit more, I would say, a bit more enjoyable. It's still lots of work, especially with preparing. SEC, that's probably the main metrics. I don't know yet. We'll see. Well, for this course, SEC has been quite good, for the whole time, about 4.5. So I can just do nothing. I'll just repeat what I've done, but just want to try a different thing, and we'll see how it goes with SEC. I'm still a bit 50-50. I don't know. Well, the thing is, because sometimes you don't know what's happening with some student who just never turn up. There's still some student out there who are in the dark zone, never communicate with you and never turn up. They probably never watch the lecture capture. That part, I'm still not quite sure how to actually manage them. Caveats. So to use this, it's not always, filled with the great roses. Not every class can be flipped. Some class, for example, the class that needs, more thinking, okay, in terms of the student to understand the concept. You can tell that in the past, if you have been teaching your course for many years, you know that which topic that they struggle to understand. So if there's one topic that student you found that the student struggle to understand, you probably, for me, I probably don't do. I have a few in my course, in my subject. So I try to kind of spend a bit more time in a traditional way to explain, stepping through like a bit more rote learning kind of type to make sure that they get that concept. Still a mix. Okay, so this is not fully flipped. This is like a partial flip. And not every student appreciates flipped classroom. As you can expect, there'll be some students who just prefer to just sit back and then listen to what you teach. There'll be students who prefer that way. So not every student will appreciate that. And not every student studies the material in advance. I think most of them won't do it. Yeah, so you got to kind of force them in a way that you got to go, and then I usually give them about 10 minutes to review things, 10-15, and then to do the activity. So that's why the activity can't be too difficult. You have to spare your time to actually prepare for different activities. So this is another big thing that will take a lot of time from you, researching for material, putting together the case, thinking about your sequence, thinking about how you want to carry out the activity. That's the main part that will take a lot out of the time. And I guess that's pretty much for my sharing my experience with you about the flipped classroom. And if you have any question or discussion, happy to do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Krieng. It was like really interesting.
What's the nature of the recordings that you have for the lecture? Is it lecture capture, or do you do a recording like this?
The recording, I kind of mix. I recycle my lecture capture from my previous offering. I recycle most of them, and some topics I did a separate recording using the bamboo thing that I can actually write and then show the working. But again, most of them still pretty much the recycled material.
But you could use something like a video camera like this and record it as a video.
Yeah, I can do that. I can do that. But that takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
You can ask Mark. Preparing separate recording is just
how long does each lecture go?
About 2.5 hours. 2.5.
Quite a long time.
Yeah, quite a long time. But that includes the times where a student go and review the material, sit down, do a bit of discussion. For some week, I went for maybe 2 hours. So it's between 2 hours and 2.5.
And a normal lectures in previous years, it's been a 3-hour class plus tutorials?
Yes, my previous, no tutorial, just pure 3-hour lecture, and that's it. And I use almost 3 hours.
So, Krieng, in a normal 10CP course, often the rhetoric is the students should be spending 10 hours a week on the course.
Yeah.
In the old version, how many hours do you think they spent on the course compared to the new version? Any difference, or is it roughly the same?
I would say, probably roughly the same. Roughly the same. Well, because look, you have to admit that a lot of them don't do the pre-learning. They don't watch material before. They probably skim through. Okay, there are a couple of times I walk into the class and then I could hear my own voice because the students were watching them. They say, "Oh, so the class is about to start. Just have a quick look at it." So probably a little bit more. And then, but the rest will be the same. I mean, the assessment, you got to make sure that the thing that you do in the flip actually got used in the assignment as well.
So in the lectures, they have to bring their own computers?
Sometimes, if they need to, I'll tell them in my learning Griffith in the announcement that in this class, please bring your laptop or tablet. If you don't, I have students who said, I don't have anything. I don't have smartphone. I don't have tablet. I don't have computer. So I told the student, you just buy one. It's a good investment. But they can use they can use with their friends. They can team up. They can. You can't force them to do that, right?
In the activities, though, as part of your discussion, you talk about what would be in the lectures as well. I would assume not as a lecture, but you would go over that.
Yes. In the beginning, it's like a review of the key concepts. I'll say, okay, for this week, we will do this activity, and we need this concept. So I'm just gonna go and have a quick review of the concepts.
How much time do you spend on that?
Depends on the activity. If the concept is a bit more like heavy, I'll probably spend about 20 minutes, sometimes half an hour, to do a bit of a review.
But does that mean they don't have to worry about reading the material? Because you give them the summary, you give them the cheat sheet, basically.
Yeah. Yes, sort of. Well, I didn't do the review at all. I sort of mentioned that, these are the topics in the beginning, but later on, I could see that the energy dropped a bit. So I feel like, okay, I need to help them a little bit just to be able to participate in the activity.
That's why when you say for company intensive courses, this may not be suitable because if the student, the whole idea is they have to do the pre-study. But if they found the material is too, challenging, although you have video, everything to them, they can't follow. They don't do that pre-study. How can you force them? Is there a scheme to force them to do that study so that it can serve the purpose?
Well, not in my course, it's not. And this is the big challenge in flipped classroom. Okay, the student need to do the pre-learning, and you need to have a strategy to to sort of somehow force them to study before. But in my course, I haven't got there yet. So I admitted I don't really have that strategy. I told them that you got to read before because we're gonna do this.
How about the UK workshop? Did they share any strategy
For
forcing?
When they talk,
If they have the class, don't do that. Then really lose the purpose of.
They talked about that. I think they kind of linked that with the assessment somehow in the end. So the student feel like, okay, I gotta study this because it's gonna be the assessment in the end.
But no doubt when you do the activities, you're not doing them in a vacuum. You're actually reinforcing the stuff that you would have talked about in the lectures. And I would say that if it was a content-driven, we should probably go back to, say, fluid mechanics, which is what I know about. So you'd be solving problems, and in those activities, you'd be solving problems, but getting them to solve the problems and talking to them about the problems. You'd probably find that once they've done that, they don't really need to go back too much over the lectures. You've explained, you solve problems, and that's where the learning takes place. Actually, watching the video is probably the only need to skim it because there's not a lot of learning going on while they're watching, as much as there is when they're actually doing.
It's fundamental concept knowledge from videos.
Well, with postgrad, I think it's okay, but with undergrad, I don't know. That's why I'm not keen to do this with the undergrad students. I'm not doing this with I might do a partial, in some lecture. I probably do that, but not the full.
Where I've seen it in these focus groups, I've seen one class was in environmental, and they had postgrads and undergrads, and the undergrads weren't there. There was 50 or so postgrads, but there was different assessment. And the assessment for the undergrads was heavily based on the exam, a little bit on the project, but heavily on the exam. And so it looked like the students were just cramming the 15-minute video that was provided, and then thinking that's enough for the exam. Whereas the postgrads were all coming because they actually had to participate to learn about how to do the project that they were all working on. And I think that's what comes back to the activities. If the activities are worthwhile in terms of their learning, that relate back to the assessment, then they will come and do it because otherwise they'll lose out. And they wouldn't be coming to your lectures anyway. Those people.
A really nasty way to grab them would be do a quicker 1% assessment each lecture.
You can kind of build that kind of assessment.
The first thing they do when they get in there is a clicker exam for 1%. That would force them to do
So the thing that I kind of, indirectly make them think that, okay, this is going to work something in the assessment is that, if I go back, so in that table there, not that one, the one here, I asked them to put their name. So they feel like, okay, I have to put my name in there, so at least, the lecturer will see my name. It's like indirectly, in a way.
Could you break your lecture, because 2.5 hours is a bit of a slog to go through. Could you break your lectures up into smaller bite-sized chunks of like half an hour each, so that 2.5 hours is 5 half-hour sessions, something like that?
5 hours. I think so. Yeah, I think I can do that. Breaking the lecture.
The performance difference between online
It's probably somewhat much there.
and
The on-campus? In the past? You mean in the past? Well, the on-campus one tend to have a bit more proportion of the HD student. On-campus one. Now, online, they're okay. Okay, the failure rate is probably same minimum as the same, but the on-campus one tend to perform. The top end will have more proportion of the student in there.
Just to help with getting them to read through the content, one of the courses in ICT, they have a time-limited quiz after the lecture. They have to go through a certain amount of content and complete the quiz, and the quizzes are worth quite a lot in assessment. If you reverse that and have them, they have to complete the quizzes before the lecture, and it's time-limited, and afterwards it's gone.
Maybe it's a good idea.
That's a similar thing with the clickers.
They don't do it, the mark's gone. And
I have online quiz, but they're more like formative. They're not worth anything. So they can, so I can use and link that with Blackboard, so I can see how well they did. But it's not much. So a lot of people.
How about like laboratory test? Students they have to submit the lab report on that day. Then they have to pre-study before the laboratory class. So maybe the student maybe they might have to have assessing on that day. The student probably.
Yeah, I think that's another way. I think this flip is a bit more still open to kind of tweak if you want to tweak and then use it in your own course, because the concept is very straightforward.
Anything you can do to force engagement, so they've really got this stuff before they come to the class. You know, a little mini test. You don't tell them what the content of the test is. Before they come to the class, they've done this test. And that's forced them to read. You're not really wanting to be formative, so you don't only want to be summative. You just try and create the engagement.
I think that's interesting approach.
One of the things I suppose that I'd be wary of in terms of labs and that assessment is what I've seen where, this is especially in labs, where the labs aren't worth a lot, but they have to do them and they take a lot of time to prepare and to do them. That then becomes quite stressful for the students because they feel like they're putting a lot of effort into these things, but they're not worth very much. So it could actually backfire on you if you have these little, tests at the beginning. They're only worth 1% overall, but they've got to work for 5 hours to be able to prepare before they get there.
No, I don't think necessarily. What I do with my clicker, so when the students come in at the beginning of the class, they've got a clicker question. They one or two questions. Not in depth. All I want to know is that have they picked the book and have they read?
Yeah.
What I'm trying to do is encourage them to read.
Yeah.
There's nothing much more than that. So I'll say, on the overall gist of things, do you think the author was trying to say this, or this? Click.
Yeah. And that's the kind of assessment you want to have. So it doesn't require lots and lots of work. But labs, I think, are one thing we often have lots of work for them to prepare, and they're not worth a lot. But
the thing is, the ambivalent ones are always going to be ambivalent. They see the clicker things are only worth 5%. They'll go up, bugger it.
Yep.
You know what I mean? But the ones that aren't going to do the work.
You're saying that, Mark, then you're probably right. But actually, the ambivalence threshold level is lowered. So you get fewer ambivalents.
I'm just thinking of my first years. I can't get up to lectures, so I won't do an assessment in lectures.
Your first year will be
that's
challenging to do this kind of thing.
I just think like that 10 or 15% I'm not getting. More than that. 10 to 15% overall, I'd never get them.
yeah, and there will be people you will never get, no matter what you do, no matter how exciting it is, no matter how engaging it is.
Yes.
But the more engaging it is, and the more value they see they're going to get out of it. And that's, I think, this issue with the labs. If it seems like it's a lot of work but not worth a lot, they will start to become unengaged in that process. If it's not a lot of work and it's actually getting something out of it, and they see they're getting benefit, they will start. More of them will participate. But there'll always be some people who just couldn't get out of it.
Let's wind back. You've heard me say this before, probably. The way we do labs is in itself unengaging. In which case, you add 2% to a 96% unengaging lab process, you're not going to get it.
No, that's right.
So you've really got to deal with the engagement factor in the activity itself.
Yes.
Once that really is quite engaging, then you can add these little nuggets to it, just to sort of, you're actually doing two things. One, you're further trying to get to engagement participation, and two, you are then also just gauging levels of activity of engagement.
Yeah, because I think the benefit with this, it's like the clickers, it forces you to think of doing things differently, because you're not just doing your lectures in a different way.
Yeah.
You're not just putting your lectures online, you actually have to come up with the activities, which forces you to think in a different way. And I agree, if we just do labs that way, the way we've always done them, but we just put something on it, if you actually think about doing labs in a different way, you can actually make them more engaging right from the very beginning, so you get more out of it maybe.
And back to that pre-learning, I think because my course is project management, a lot of the material there are common sense. The student can actually skim through and then kind of get the idea quick. So that's why this one, like, I could do it, but with very intense course, very hardcore engineering. I don't know how low that would go.
I don't know. I think
I think you could do it. I could see how you could do this in fluid mechanics, because one of the best hours that I ever taught in was one where I said very little, but I gave them a problem to work on, and we spent the whole hour working on that problem as a class, back and forwards. And I threw away the content for that lecture, and they got more out of that 1 hour. That's what one person said. I got more out of this 1 hour than I did in the rest of the course.
That's not particularly the flipped classroom thing.
No, that's not a flip. No.
So it's the engaged classroom, not necessarily the flipped classroom. You could do that by flipping as well.
Yes, that's right.
But so what you've done here, Krieng, you've got flipped and engaged, and they're all sort of mashed together in a unique style. They're both good things to be done. But now you could do a very formal chalk and talk type lecture series in a flipped classroom mode.
Yep.
Which was noting that G42 has a flipped classroom lecture theatre. Which we need G42 next door.
The new one.
It's beautiful.
So it's levels flipped.
Yes, so it's levels, but yes.
No.
So what we can walk through there, we can go back to the office.
Well, it's interesting, at the senior executives conference at the beginning of the year, at UTS, they spent $10 billion doing up their buildings, and there's not one lecture theatre in the building, in any of the buildings. They're all basically flipped.
Because the space is another obstacle as well. If you do like a typical lecture theatre, you can't get them to sit together, and then you got to walk, and then.
Well, what they did is they do have these lecture theatres, but wherever they have the lecture theatres in a tier, on each tier, these seats can turn around. So you can have people facing on every level.
We've got one of those within 20 metres of here.
But for
No, one
300 students. No, I mean for 300, 400 first year students. And the lecture has to go up and down.
If you lose weight that semester, it gets stronger.
It becomes resourcing like Krieng said. You've got to do things differently. And I think the benefit is you've got to think about doing things differently. And that's if nothing else, that changes your perspective.
So if we do flips, so ideally, is it possible to remove the lecture and just have the tutorial and workshop? So
Yes.
is it possible?
Yeah. But
So remove all the workload.
Yeah.
Yes, this is flip course, so there's no lecture, just workshop.
you probably want to, I would say you'd probably want to have one class where you've got everyone together, but not necessarily a lecture, but where you do something together, but you probably wouldn't have to. You could do them in smaller groups. The trouble is when you're doing it in smaller groups, you're never sure is everyone doing the same thing.
Something come out, integrated design project can be the flip class, because they all learn in first 3 years, and fourth year they all integrate together. So I hope they remember that.
We hope they're supposed to.
I went to a very interesting course many years ago, and they played a business game. So they taught us what they wanted to teach us, and then we played a business game for the rest of the week. It was an intensive course. And if you had remembered what they told you in the lectures, then the game was a piece of cake. It was dead simple. We just killed everybody because we just simplified the rules essentially that had been told to us. Now you can imagine having a flipped classroom, in the reading material before the classroom, all the rules that you need to do. Then you can play a business game. Project management is an easy to play a business game for you. 4 companies vying to build the best whatever it is in competition with each other, and a game goes on.
Yeah, that's gamification.
And as long as they're following the rules of project management, everything goes well. And as soon as you can see they're not, you chuck in a curveball.
It's good you've chosen activities for them to be engaged. So I think that's one reason they're getting a lot of out of it, because they're doing an activity which is applying what they're learning, and they're probably really enjoy it.
But I guess for probably next year, this is going to be a bit better, when I start to build up my database of the cases and things like that.
It is interesting that whenever you go to a talk on education that tells you to flip the classes or things like that, the lecturer stands out the front and tells you how to do it rather than doing it. But if you critically reflect on that, the reality is that even in your flipped class, you do stand out the front, you do have to talk, but what you're not necessarily doing is giving a lecture on definitions and solves and equations and things like that. Those things they can read in a book, or they can listen to you talking separately. But it's the ideas and being able to discuss. And
Okay, I guess we should finish it.
All right, thanks for a good discussion. Anyone watching on the other end, we're signing out. Thank you.
Oh, I saw that too.
Yeah.